Hi there, this is Davy J. Fielding, Zordon from the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and you're watching Pomelo Retro with Matt Fisher. Matt's about to watch that iconic episode from In Space, and I think you guys know what's about to happen, so enjoy. And as Zordon would tell you, may the power protect you.
Okay, so let's face it, Power Rangers Turbo and Geksu Sentai Car Ranger just weren't that good. Now, we're not always going to agree on these things, and that's fine, but remember there's going to be a difference between watching these series purely for fun and then watching them whilst also trying to write a coherent script. And certainly those last seasons did not make that easy, so obviously they're not going to rank too high in comparison to some series that I've done. That's just the way it goes. But then again, I'm sure there's probably people that just like to say the opposite of the prevailing opinion for the hell of it. But if that's the case, then you're just lying to yourselves. And lies make Jesus cry, so you just think about that. But this next video is important, for reasons I can't actually tell you just yet, but trust me, if you're around my age and you generally know Power Rangers based on the Mighty Morphin era, because that's what you grew up with in the early 90s, then there's some pretty significant character development in the next series. And for those that have been following this series from the beginning, then there's a lot of questions that finally get answered. Then again, there's many that go unanswered too, but it, Power Rangers is Deus Ex Machina. But after all, that's the point of these videos. It's not necessarily for the diehards that have seen every season of Power Rangers and Super Sentai. It's for those that want to watch along with me and learn the things that they missed along the way. So it's time that we delve into part 6 of this series. Me, part 6, what have I been doing with my life? Part 6 of this series, and ask the question, Power Rangers in Space and Denji Sentai Megaranger, what's the difference? At the end of the last series, we saw the new Power Ranger lineup, minus Justin that is, which is no bad thing, board a space shuttle with Alpha 6 and head out into space in order to reach Eltar, the home planet and supposed current dwelling of Zordon and Alpha 5. But this is where it gets difficult and is one of the hardest things to try and explain throughout this series. Technically speaking, since before the beginning of the Mighty Morphin era, Zordon hasn't actually been on Earth, but rather trapped in a time warp thanks to Rita Repulsa. So I don't know what was actually transferred to Eltar, because it certainly doesn't appear that it was Zordon himself, as the floating head in the energy tube wasn't his physical head, it was more like an image on a screen that had just been tuned to the Zordon FaceTime, as it were. We never really learned where, or indeed when, Zordon was. He's an interdimensional being, presumably meaning that he was once capable of travelling through different dimensions. But when Rita trapped him in the time warp, he had no physical presence on Earth, or I assume even in our dimension. But anyway, we will come back to this because in theory, he was meant to have been freed by Larigo. In theory. But when they do the power transfer to the new Turbo Rangers, he's back in an energy tube. And this is going to be something that keeps cropping up. But for now, let's just get on with things. The new series starts with a meeting of villains, including Lord Zed and Rita, who have been mostly absent since the end of Power Rangers Zeo, and also the Machine Empire, which we'd been left to assume were all destroyed by Rita and Lord Zed at the end of Zeo. Divatox is also at this gathering, fresh from her successful attack on the command centre and the destruction of the Turbo Rangers' power, but her summons to this meeting put a halt to her takeover of Earth. This gathering/dinner party is organised by Dark Spectre, who is basically a repackaged Malagor from the Turbo movie. And to be fair, it's not the last time we see this kind of recycling. In episode 10, the monster Waspicable is just a modified version of the Grumblebee costume from season 1 of the Mighty Morphin era. Dark Spectre has captured Zordon as a prisoner of the war on Eltar, although as I mentioned, Zordon still appears in an energy tube when he was meant to have been released. So has he actually captured Zordon, or just a glorified TV? But ignore that for now. The point is he's captured Zordon and is draining him of his power. Little sidebar, we don't really know what power Zordon actually has. It's never really explained, but considering the Zords were named after him, Zordon, Zords, we can assume that there's something pretty powerful there that Dark Spectre wants to either harness or at least destroy. Anyway, the celebration is interrupted as a Red Ranger is revealed to be a spy hidden under a cloak. But rather than sending Divatox after him, despite being the only villain to really successfully defeat the Power Rangers, Dark Spectre sends a new-to-the-series villain called Astronomer. Back on the space shuttle, and the Turbo Rangers are plotting their course to Eltar. Thankfully, Alpha has lost his ridiculous Brooklyn accent, because his speech circuit board was fried in the power chamber explosion, and luckily when his voice does return, it's close to that of Alpha 5.
Ay, ay, ay! Now I've seen everything!
But soon enough they're forced to dock with a larger ship known as the Astro Megaship. Meanwhile, after dealing with a couple of minions that were sent after him, the Red Ranger heads back to the ship to discover the defeated Turbo Rangers and Alpha 6. But before they can establish that they're not enemies, the ship is attacked by Astronomer. A loosened cable nearly causes it to smash into the nearest planet, but TJ is able to get the engine back online just in time for a somewhat controlled crash landing. After hearing that they are in search of Zordon, the Red Ranger decides to trust the Turbo Rangers in the fight against the landing Astronomer-led forces. It's just lucky that they crash landed on a planet with the right gravity and atmosphere to support life. Also, it's lucky that despite not being morphed, they seem unharmed by the massive Klingon blades that her forces are carrying. After all, I'm assuming that the audience is meant to think that they're metal and not just rubber. After the battle, the Red Ranger introduces himself as Andros, a human born off Earth. But rather than joining forces, he then leaves them on the new planet with their ship, but not with Alpha. Astronomer's forces, or Quantrons, reappear to attack the Rangers, but Alpha is able to convince Andros to turn around, and he arrives just in time to save them from Astronomer herself. He then hands them some new morphers, and we get the first of the new morph sequences. And, okay, I'm a little confused. Rather than creating a new morph sequence, they seem to use the Japanese one, which is fine, that's nothing new, but there's something weird about their helmets. Each of the Rangers has their own symbol. Andros appears to have a 90s style PC, TJ, now the Blue Ranger, and Carlos, now the Black Ranger, have their morph sequences cut short, and we can't really tell what these are meant to be anyway. Although in episode 7 we do see that Carlos' symbol is apparently a satellite. Cassie has, I think, a mobile phone, and Ashley has what looks like a camcorder. We get some sense of what Cassie's ability may be, as she's essentially carrying a small satellite dish as a weapon, and she also mentions a monster's frequency at one point, but we're never really too sure. And that's not to mention that they all have this text on the side of the screen, which reads, "Tighten up reality gangster, stigma through idiot hearing, keep frustration clear, patience open ahead, getting away with it, lead some distant memory drove, get the message, in discipline all remains, wish double editorials cover, under stress new canoe." Okay. They break out their signature weapons, the Spiral Saber, Lunar Lance, Star Slinger, Satellite Stunner and Astro Axe, but back on the ship we learn that the space shuttle, which it's important to note was never Power Rangers property in the first place, it was designed and built by a knockoff version of NASA, was seemingly actually designed to dock with Andros' ship to form the Astro Megazord, which makes no sense of course because Andros isn't from Earth, but maybe it was designed by Zordon? I guess that could work. They enter into a battle with Astronomer's ship, and wait, hang on, when did they head back to Earth? No, never mind, you know what, if we question everything, we'll never get through this. The ship is destroyed, and I guess we're meant to assume Astronomer is dead too, but no, she's not dead, and I guess that wasn't Earth either, as she appears alive again, and then they do actually set a course for Earth, which is apparently quite far away. Back on the Blue Marble, Bulk and Skull are still knocking about, but this time alien hunting with a mad professor. But the juice bar is out of the picture, and the new hangout du jour is the surf spot run by Adele. Or more like Laverne from Scrubs, because she's basically the same character.
Hell yeah!
That's Hollywood typecasting for you. And we also never really learn what happens to Lieutenant Stone. At least with Ernie we knew that he goes off to the Amazon, but Lieutenant Stone is just gone. We also learn that while Andros is technically human, he does actually have some powers that resemble the Force from Star Wars. Bulk and Skull tip them off that they'd seen an alien ship and Astronomer's Quantrons arrive, along with Eclipdor, this guy that looks like he's the inspiration for those Tron-style Lamborghinis that turn up in London every summer. He tries to destroy the Nasada space shuttle, but the Rangers jump on board and launch. because apparently they're allowed to do that and can remote launch it, and also never had to explain why they didn't reach Eltar in the first place, despite probably costing Nasada billions, if not trillions. And by the way, where is Justin gone? And the first generation Turbo Rangers, for that matter? And Kimberly? And Jason? And Rocky? Who knows? Definitely not the writers. They reach Andros' ship, and then immediately leave it again to form the Astro Megazord and take out Ecliptor. Only he's able to project multiple versions of himself, so Ashley uses her Light Star helmet mode, the camcorder thing, to figure out which one is real, and use the Astro Megazord saber to blow him up. Only he isn't actually destroyed because we see him throughout this series, so I have no idea what happened to him in this instance. Astronomer then instructs Elgar, who is now working for her by the way, to lock lasers on New York City and bring the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles up from the sewers. Oh, you heard right. This actually reminds me of a similar crossover that happened when playing as a kid, which I shall now recreate faithfully for you all to see. It's morphin' time! Oh my god, the ooze is mutating us! Oh, whoa, cowabunga dudes, we're now inexplicably bigger than you. Want some pizza? It's kind of lost the magic it had when I was 6. And incidentally, Astronomer, pretty sure that is a tortoise, not a turtle. Do not drop it in water. These are actually the next mutation version of the turtles, including Venus. Despite the impressive costumes and the crossovers like this one, the show didn't go down too well and was the first time a TMNT show got cancelled with no real concept of what was going to replace it. But anyway, back to the show. Astronomer brainwashes the turtles into doing her bidding. Initially, they pretend to be on the Rangers' side, defeating one of Astronomer's monsters. They then get invited onto the Rangers' ship, but Andros doesn't trust them and soon catches them messing with Decker, the ship's onboard sentient computer. Astronomer boards the megaship and takes the Rangers as prisoners, but they're able to escape in the space shuttle, so Astronomer and the turtles then give chase in the main ship, but when they pass by a magnetic field, her spell wears off and the turtles turn back to normal. After a little bit of wire fondling, they're able to return Decker back to normal and join forces with the Rangers to defeat her. Well, for now anyway. To be honest, it's not the best of crossovers, but it's still pretty cool to have. We'd have to wait over 20 years to get another stab at it. Although, apparently the turtles can survive in space without any kind of protection or breathing equipment. Who knew that was possible? I guess they're more mutant than we thought. And incidentally, this is the last that we see of them, despite some future peril, which we'll get back to. By the way, do these kids not actually have any families, or would school not just wonder where they've gone? You can't just f*** off into space without someone questioning it. They don't even ask the turtles to let their families know that they're okay when they take them back to New York. We at least know Cassie had a dog, but her family were presumably somewhere else because she travelled to Angel Grove alone. So Jetson's probably dead then. But then in some episodes they randomly just drop back into school, which doesn't make much sense, not least because why would Andros be in school? He's not even an Earthling. To be fair, he's not actually under pressure to go to class, so why does he even show up? In episode 5 we learn that Andros had a sister, Corone, who he's been searching for years. There's a faint signal coming from KO-35, his home planet, but when he investigates to see if it's her, he's ambushed by Ecliptor. This is something that gets dropped for a while as they needed to pad the season out a bit, but we'll come back to it. This does actually turn out to be quite important. So the next few episodes are pretty much just filler, although in episode 7 we do see the introduction of the Quadroblaster, essentially the combined form of the Rangers' weapons minus the Spiral Saber. Then in episode 8 we first see the Mega Tank, but that doesn't come up very often. And in episode 9 we have the short-lived Craterites, a bunch of simulated putties that end up becoming real, although we don't actually see them again, so no need to dwell on them. But anyway, the season picks back up properly again in episode 11. Divatox reappears and takes Zordon with her, or at least the energy tube that he's appearing in. Seriously, can't he just appear in another energy tube? Whether Larigo freed Zordon from the Time Warp or not, that shouldn't be Zordon. He's physically somewhere else. It's just an energy tube that's slowly filling up with lava. It shouldn't really affect him. I don't really understand this plot point, but let's just get on with it for now. So, the Phantom Ranger reappears and sends a message to the Rangers to let them know where Zordon is, but is attacked by both Divatox and Astronomer. Even though the Rangers come to help him, he's badly injured in the fight. So I guess he's a robot then, and not a Ranger in a suit. I believe it was planned to do an origin story for the Phantom Ranger at some point, but I don't think it's ever really confirmed who or what he is. I mean, he's obviously not a Phantom, but other than that, we have no idea. Before collapsing, he tells the Rangers where he can find the Delta Megaship, another ship, and consequently another Zord. Once Andros figures out how to take control of the ship, it forms the Battleizer, but it can be controlled via a communicator on his wrist, and it can also form the Delta Megazord, which, to be fair, is actually pretty cool with spinning minigun arms for good measure. When the Rangers return, the Phantom Ranger has disappeared again to pursue Dark Spectre. What follows is a bit of filler as the Rangers continue to search the universe for Zordon. They're not bad episodes necessarily, they're just not all that necessary. There's bits in each episode that aid character development, but they are few and far between. In episode 12, when the Delta Megazord is turned against the Rangers, they're somehow able to not only bring it back to their side, but also join it with the Astro Megazord to form the Astro Delta Megazord, essentially a more armoured version of the Astro Megazord with the added miniguns. Then in episode 14, back on the trail for Zordon, we're introduced to Darkonda, a character that's clearly not on the side of the Power Rangers, but also isn't too fond of Ecliptor. At one point in episode 15, he shows his true colours and forcefully merges with Ecliptor, forming Darkliptor. His stealing of Ecliptor's powers is meant to be the first stage in eventually taking down Astronomer, and then trying to overthrow Dark Spectre. This is an interesting character, because it's not easy to just place him in Team Dark Spectre or Team Power Rangers. He's more of a lone wolf that delights in causing chaos, rather than working towards what either party sees as the greater good. For example, Rita and Lord Zed don't get on with the Machine Empire, Astronomer, or Divatox, but they either work together or stand aside depending on what's best for the Evil Alliance. Somewhat reluctantly, that is, but they still do it. Darkonda throws a spanner into the works, and it kind of feels like what General Havoc's character could have been like if handled a bit differently in Turbo. But anyway, Dark Clipter only lasts for this one episode initially, and they're just back to normal before the credits roll. But even so, he manages to convince Astronomer to accept him as Ecliptor's equal. After much reflecting, Andros finally realises that it was Darkonda that kidnapped his sister Corone. He travels to the planet Onyx to confront him in a game of cards, in which he wins a number of keycards that once belonged to Zordon. The keycards are then used as bargaining chips for information on KO-35. Darkonda admits that he did in fact kidnap a young girl and that she's still alive, but he stops short of telling Andros where she is when he notices his morphing brace. Even so, he manages to escape with the cards, and when Darkonda tries to get them back, he realises that a potion he obtained to give him extra strength had previously been poisoned by Ecliptor. He then goes on a roided out rampage that was designed to make Astronomer no longer trust him, although that doesn't really work. After an intense battle, Alpha manages to decipher part of the keycards and flee to one of Jupiter's moons, as supposedly there's some sort of weapon stored there. Astronomer tortures the original keycard thief into telling them what he knows, and then they attempt to pursue the Rangers. All the while the Astro Megazord, with Alpha inside, is on the verge of being destroyed. They eventually find a collection of 5 new mega vehicles, supposedly hidden there by Zordon for an emergency. Except for the fact that there's been many emergencies when knowing about these would have been useful. Speaking of which, if he knew Andros, why did he never call on him before? An extra Ranger could have been really useful in a number of past battles. Depending on when Zordon hid these vehicles, he probably should have thought to at least mention them at some point before buggering off to Eltar. Either that or send the robot clones to retrieve them, because they never mention anything about having their own set of Turbozords, so God only knows what they did when Eltar was attacked. But I think we can safely assume that they're all dead now. Wait, hang on. If they're dead, then who was it in Super Megaforce? Who knows, that episode's a mess. And yes, I'm sure you're all as devastated as I am that Robot Justin probably died a horrible death. So you know what? Why don't we all just take a minute or two to grieve and remember all the great moments that Justin brought us. So, moving on. The keycards are required to start the vehicles, which mostly resemble ships from Thunderbirds, aside from Mega V1, which is more like a smaller version of a Megazord. But they are indeed able to make their own version of Megazord in the form of Mega Voyager. So we're not even halfway through the season yet, and we already have 3 Megazords. But anyway, Darkonda is taken out, if only temporarily, and the Rangers are left licking their wounds as Astro Megazord and the ship that it's made from are severely damaged. And then in episode 18 we get a view of what's been going on since Divatox destroyed the Turbo powers. At the end of the Turbo series, we saw that both Storm Blaster and Lightning Cruiser came to the aid of the Turbo Rangers as the command center was being attacked. They were then captured, but we never found out what actually happened to them. It turns out that Divatox's Piranatrons still have them, but Storm Blaster is able to escape and return to Earth from wherever it was taken. But then the Rangers get captured when they go to meet up with it. So then we switch back to Suburbia and oh, it's Justin. Justin's back, everyone. Yay. Storm Blaster returns to Justin, who jumps aboard, and they ride off together to rescue the Rangers, somehow, when he's just a normal kid now. And yet he has no issue beating up the Quantrons when they're meant to have metal armour. Just how weak are those things? It turns out that Storm Blaster somehow managed to rescue Justin's morpher, and then he morphs back into the blue Turbo Ranger. What? Come on, there was no need to have this episode whatsoever. All it does is add continuity-breaking filler. Besides, of all the previous Turbo Rangers that you could have brought back, why Justin? I know he had the potential to go to space with them, but if you write into the script that his morpher was somehow saved, then you could have done that with literally any of them. So if this is just a fan service episode, then let it be Tommy or Rocky or Adam or anyone. But Justin? Actually, hold that thought. We do actually see Adam again, but that has its own problems that we'll get back to later. You could even have the entire lineup of the Zeo Rangers come back to their rescue, to be fair, because we still haven't established whether those powers were actually destroyed or not. Predictably, this is only for the one episode, and they managed to save Lightning Cruiser as well. But rather than Justin becoming an ally of the Space Ranger, he just goes back to living a normal life. Which I can understand, but what happens to Storm Blaster and Lightning Cruiser? Didn't they come from space anyway? So why can't they just join the team and fight for the good guys, but in space? And why haven't the Rangers seen Justin until now? We never actually found out whether or not Justin had moved. His dad got a new job and he was going to have to move away, but then he says he'll stay in Angel Grove if Justin doesn't want to leave. So if they stayed, then they should have seen each other in school, or at least around town. I guess we're left to assume that he moved away, because otherwise it messes up with the whole ending of Turbo. After all, the only reason Justin stayed behind on Earth was to be with his dad, and with the Rangers now gone, he had no real reason to stay in Angel Grove, so they could have moved away together. But then we're meant to believe that the Rangers keep going back to Earth anyway, and don't even attempt to contact him. Now I know they didn't know that they'd be returning to Earth so often when they initially set out for Eltar, and neither could Justin, but on one of their regular returns to Earth, would they not have at least considered Justin for a role somewhere? Especially as they'd managed to team up with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles when they're in New York and Angel Grove is, I think, meant to be in California. The only reason I could have assumed this episode exists, and it definitely would have been by accident, is that maybe Justin's connection to Storm Blaster meant that his powers weren't completely destroyed, and so the same effect would be true for TJ and Lightning Cruiser, which would explain how he's able to return as the Red Turbo Ranger in Power Rangers Wild Force, which I mentioned right back at the beginning of the last video, and all of a sudden Forever Red has one less continuity error, which is a frickin' miracle. But I highly doubt that that was in the writers' minds at the time, because initially it was thought that In Space was going to be the last season, so I suppose this was all trying to tie up some loose ends, and while it does answer some questions, it actually raises many more. But all of this talk of a potential 6th Ranger is a bit premature, because lo and behold, there is one. Hidden behind a panel in the engine room is another Ranger in what appears to be cryogenic suspension. At first only Andros is aware of this, but when a malfunction pops open the hidden entrance, the other Rangers find his cryogenic tube and realise that he's still alive, although frozen. This is supposedly Zane, the Silver Ranger. He was nearly killed in a battle on KO-35, and the incubator is not only keeping him alive, but is also slowly healing him. Maybe. He's been in it for 2 years, and there's no sense of whether he'll ever be able to wake up again. It's actually a really good way of showing just how powerful Dark Spectre can be. Rita eventually managed to destroy the original Ranger's powers, and then Divatox was able to destroy the Turbo Rangers and the command center, but no one had actually managed to go as far as killing a Ranger. And this was supposedly just one of Dark Spectre's monsters, not even Dark Spectre himself. Andros was presumably worried that if a Ranger that he worked so well with could be effectively killed, then so could any of the others, or even himself. Later, with the ship under attack from some hooded creatures and a stowaway monster, Zane is resurrected and becomes part of the Ranger lineup, and also the future inspiration for Jimmy McElroy.
Soon, Jimmy was sweeping the gold, while his trademark Jimmy Curl was sweeping the nation, with kids of all ages fashion drafting right behind their idol.
It also sets up a love triangle storyline as Zane wastes no time moving on Ashley, even though Andros has been trying to work up the courage to say something to her since the beginning of the series. Although that doesn't last very long because Ashley and Andros do actually eventually get together. But then Zane ends up having somewhat of a love story with Astronomer, for some reason, but never mind because that doesn't really go anywhere. It soon becomes apparent though that Zane's morphing powers keep failing. Alpha explains that he'll only be able to remain morphed for short periods of time because his morphing power was slowly leaking whilst in suspension, like a car battery going flat if you leave it parked for too long. The way to fix this is apparently a massive shock of electricity, so he heads out in search of a lightning storm. This somehow doesn't kill him and instead restores his powers back to normal, but he ends up leaving the team for a few episodes when they discover a group of KO-35 rebels when tracking a signal thought to be from Zordon. Dark Spectre discovers where they're hiding, so Zane decides to stay there and help for a while. In episode 25, Carlos accidentally injures Cassie and starts to question whether he's capable of being a Power Ranger. We also see Bulk and Skull return for a short time, as they've been noticeably absent for much of the series. It's odd because Bulk and Skull could be used well. They had some really nice moments in Zeo, but they often got saddled with the stuff that was just too slapstick and cheesy. That was certainly the case in Turbo. But anyway, as Carlos is singled out by a monster, Adam, the former Black and Green Ranger, appears out of nowhere and agrees to train Carlos into becoming a better Ranger, which you'd think should have happened during the initial Turbo handover, especially as Adam was actually Carlos's coach at the time anyway, before he mysteriously disappeared with the rest of the former Rangers. Adam reveals that he still has his original morpher and ponders whether it still works, but Alpha warns him against trying it. This actually creates more complications, but I do understand why they did it. The original Power Coin, i.e. Adam's Mastodon coin rather than his Frog coin, was supposedly destroyed in a power surge, but the fact that it still works to some degree sets up the idea that the powers could be restored at some point, and it would maybe explain why Mighty Morphin Era Rangers are able to return in future crossovers as the morphing grid eventually gets fixed in Operation Overdrive. But it doesn't really explain why Adam would risk using a broken morpher when there's never been able to suggest that he couldn't just become the Green Zeo Ranger. Zordon initially said that the old powers were destroyed and that's why they needed the Zeo powers in the first place, but that was the ninja powers, not the original powers. The original Zords were gone and the Thunder Zords may have gone down in flames at the end of Season 2, but it's not inconceivable that a surge on the powers could be fixed. Zordon actually hints that the powers could be returned, although at that time the Command Center's powers were depleted so couldn't revitalise the original power or the Thunder Zords. Now again, I guess it's just fan service to try and tie up some loose ends, but it leaves the most glaring loose end untouched, and that is, why doesn't he just use the Zeo powers? I brought this up in the previous video, but it's never actually been officially answered. I understand that it doesn't look as good on TV now that Carlos is the Black Ranger and Adam would be the Green Ranger. It looks much better to have two Black Rangers, but it would definitely make more sense. In the end it works out because some Rangers need to return for future crossovers, but for anyone watching at the time it must have been frustrating. It would have been for me, but then again possibly I try to apply more logic than I should. As Carlos decides to leave the group, Adam manages to morph into the original form Black Ranger to fight a monster sent by Astronomer, but the destroyed Power Coin and Morpher obviously aren't quite up to scratch as the powers keep failing, but even so he gives Carlos all the encouragement he needs to return. In episode 26, Astronomer begins to get curious about how she came to be where she is. Ecliptor apparently rescued her and raised her to later become his queen, but she begins to wonder whether she's destined to be evil at all. She found herself falling for the Silver Ranger after all, and then she saves a family from her own Quantrons. And then following on from that, Ecliptor saves Andros from being destroyed, although he doesn't really know why. But even so, Astronomer fights the Red Ranger and ends up losing a locket from around her neck. Andros later recovers it, and the two start to realise that Astronomer is actually Corone, his long-lost sister, and it was Darkonda that kidnapped her. Although of course she struggles to come to terms with this at first, and refuses to accept it. This actually plays into Darkonda's hands, as it means that the Astronomer is torn between good and evil, thus leaving her and Ecliptor's positions with Dark Spectre in doubt. As such, Ecliptor proves that his loyalty is more towards Astronomer rather than to evil in general by battling Darkonda, but even so he affirms that he is still evil, it's just that he has to pick his battles in order to keep Astronomer on side, and regardless of what she does, he loves her like a daughter. Ecliptor does actually win this battle, but a pattern is starting to emerge here. Darkonda's not dying. He has in fact been granted 9 lives by Dark Spectre, but we will come back to this a bit later. Astronomer is then tested by Dark Spectre to see if she'll turn to the good side. She maybe tricks Andros into letting her onto her ship, and they head out supposedly to where Zordon is being kept, although TJ insists that she has to be restrained, for obvious reasons, at least until they reach the planet where Zordon is meant to be. The theory being that Dark Spectre is meant to think that the megaship has been captured along with the Rangers, and then will allow them to pass, but it actually hasn't been captured, she's switched sides. But TJ remains suspicious and ends up crash landing the ship to escape a Quantron escort. But before we know whose side Astronomer is really on, they're ambushed by Darkonda. Ecliptor finds them and Astronomer tells him to let them flee, but that only forces Darkonda into another battle, this time losing. And while Astronomer does deliver Andros to Zordon, it's revealed that it was a trap after all, with Zordon actually being Dark Spectre in disguise. But then she turns again when she realises she can't go through with the orders to destroy the Rangers. She's then attacked by Darkonda, who is in turn killed, again, by Ecliptor. That's 5 lives down and more twists than a pack of Twizzlers. The Rangers manage to escape with Astronomer, or Corone shall we just call her now, but Ecliptor is overrun and returned to Darkonda and Dark Spectre. While Darkonda is put in charge, it's only temporary as Dark Spectre still has faith that Astronomer will return. In episode 29, Corone is made an honorary Power Ranger, although we don't actually know what that's meant to mean at this point. While she adopts the colour purple, she's never actually shown as the Purple Ranger, which is a shame because it could have happened. There's not a huge amount of Japanese footage that's actually used in this series, so there's no reason why she couldn't have had a suit made for a few scenes with Darkonda. It surely wouldn't have cost that much to just make another suit. But anyway, back on the bad guy's ship, Ecliptor is modified to make him more loyal, and Dark Spectre sends an asteroid on a collision course with Earth. And this is where it kind of goes all Armageddon Deep Impact on us, with the Rangers planting bombs on the surface of an asteroid, not that that really does anything. So Corone sneaks aboard the Dark Fortress to divert the asteroid away, only when she bumps into Ecliptor, she discovers his new enhancements and is captured. In the meantime, the Rangers need to jump into action to try and use the Megazords to divert the asteroid, although the Astro Megazord, Delta Megazord and Mega Voyager aren't enough. If only the Zeozords hadn't been destroyed. Shame. Actually, what about Justin with Stormblaster and Lightning Cruiser? Where did they go? Justin even says, if you ever need me again, I'm always here.
If you ever need me again, I'm always here.
Lies. And lies make Jesus cry. Anyway, it doesn't matter because Zane comes to the rescue in a new Zord called the Mega Winger. Meanwhile, Bulk and Skull steal a rocket and blast off into space. Because of course they do. It's just a good job they knew how to launch and land it. It turns out though that they landed, or at least crash landed, back on Earth anyway. But then their reunion with the Power Rangers kicks off their eventual importance towards the end of the series. Andros and Zane sneak aboard the Dark Fortress to rescue Corone, disguised as Quantrons. A bit like the rescue of Princess Leia in Star Wars when they disguise themselves as stormtroopers. Only Corone has been brainwashed and turned into, I guess, sort of a cyborg. But in actual fact, she no longer feels the loyalty that she used to feel when she was human, so she has no problem trying to destroy Dark Spectre, and hatches a plan to overthrow him. And interestingly, she also chooses to expel Darkonda. The only problem is, this transformation leads to a weird point in the series. In episode 31, as the Rangers take a break and return back to Earth, by this point presumably they're no longer going to school and they've lost contact with their families, a group of Dark Rangers appear. It's not like they've done that before. But thankfully they've got a worse shot than Stormtroopers, so never actually managed to kill anyone. But while their shooting skills may not be up to much, these are actually the Psycho Rangers, and they're stronger, faster and smarter than the Power Rangers in every way. They're even able to absorb information from the Rangers' minds directly to be able to predict all of their moves. But to be fair, I'm going to skip over a lot of this, as it's kind of a mini-series within the main series, with multiple encounters spanning a few episodes. And also in 2019, the Psycho Ranger story was explored further in the Psychopath story arc in the comics. Eventually they're able to make some proper headway when TJ comes up with the idea of confusing the Psycho Rangers by all adopting blue Ranger suits. I'm not really sure how that works though, because they're not meant to be costumes, they're meant to be power suits. So where do they get 5 blue power suits from? Zane also gets planted within the group as the Silver Psycho Ranger, so that he can do damage from within. Only Astronomer doesn't really care if they're destroyed, because she's linked the Psycho Ranger's powers directly to Dark Spectre. So the more that they're defeated, the more he is, which works out just fine for her, although Dark Spectre doesn't know that she's the one responsible for his energy drain. He doesn't even know that they're under Astronomer's command. This all leads to a final battle in which they're destroyed in their monster forms, as they're unable to function as a team. Even so, they're not technically gone, presumably because Dark Spectre is still alive, and they live on as ghosts, unable to interact with the physical world. But of course they come back with a weird story where people get turned into data cards, including the Rangers, but the Psychos want to destroy them, so bring them back only to get turned into cards themselves. I don't really know. But the main reason I mention this episode is because Andros realises that he has an armoured form, which isn't really important to the storyline. It's just nice that it's something a bit more impressive than the metallic armour that the Mighty Morphin Rangers had, which was basically just glitter. Even so, in reality, it was probably just an excuse to make another special edition action figure. A similar thing happens in the next episode when Zane turns up in the Galactic Rover. This is all fine, but it kind of takes the series off on a tangent when, up to this point, most episodes have been ones not to miss. It's almost like this could have all been siphoned off into a mini-series, or even a Power Rangers in Space Season 2, but squeezing it into the end of this series feels like a lot of inconsequential stuff going on just to distract from the more important storylines like Darkonda coming back and Ecliptor managing to temporarily supercharge himself to destroy the Delta Megazord and damage the Mega Voyager. One final episode is squeezed in before the epic finale, but there's not a lot to say about it. It just re-establishes the Andros-Ashley flame, except it does end with the Mega Voyager being destroyed, leaving only the Astro Megazord and Zane's Mega Winger still functioning. And so we reach what is probably the most important two-part episode of all the episodes we've covered over this video, and also the previous 5 videos too, with Countdown to Destruction. Astronomer begins to rally the troops of Divatox, the Machine Empire, and Rita and Lord Zed. They're all sent to attack the Equation Rangers, Trey of Treforia, the Phantom Ranger, and the Blue Centaurion. After conquering a number of planets, the Dark Forces set their sights on Earth, with ground forces and airstrikes causing massive destruction and taking hostages. But before they're able to destroy the planet once and for all, Darkonda decides to take his shot at becoming the Supreme Leader, stealing the ultimate weapon and attacking Dark Spectre, seemingly to destroy him. But before he can deliver a fatal blow to Astronomer and Ecliptor, Dark Spectre reappears, swallowing him and the weapon to destroy them both for good. So that's all of Darkonda's 9 lives gone. 1 went in battle with the Mega Voyager, 1 thanks to Zane, 1 from his own trap, 2 at the hands of Ecliptor, 1 from Zane in the Galactic Rover, and then there's a couple missing. But either way, we do know that that was the last life, as he'd been marking them off on a chart, like the world's worst advent calendar. Astronomer assumes command and threatens the people of Earth to give up the Power Rangers, or she'll destroy the planet and everyone on it. Meanwhile, Zane was unable to protect the KO-35 rebels, and lost the Mega Winger in the process. Andros attempts to sneak aboard the Dark Fortress to try and restore Corone back to her former self, while in a true I'm Spartacus moment, Bulk and Skull potentially sacrifice themselves to save Earth, claiming that they're both Rangers, which then forces more to come forward in an act of defiance. But here's where I have a little bit of a problem. It's awesome to see the return of all these characters, even if a lot of them are pretty much captured straight away, and it's genuinely a really nice moment to have Bulk and Skull be the bravest of us all. But this is a battle for the universe. The Earth is on the brink of destruction, with every life form it contains being completely obliterated. So where are all the other crossover characters? Where's Masked Rider? I mean, granted he may not be on Earth, but what about the Turtles? Where are they? What about Billy? We do see the Equation Rangers were in battle with Divatox, but no Billy. Why not? I mean, we can assume that David Yost may have been asked and turned it down, we don't know, but still, if Adam can return, even if temporarily, then technically so can Billy, assuming he's still got his morpher. Which, by the way, where is Adam? And what about the rest of the Mighty Morphin Era Rangers too, morphed or unmorphed? Because if Bulk and Skull can fight barefisted, then so can they. Or, if we've established that the powers could somewhat be restored, temporarily or otherwise, then Rocky could have returned the powers of the Red Ranger to Jason, assuming he doesn't already still have his own power coin, and that Trey still has the Gold Zeo Ranger's powers, as we saw in this episode, and then he could have just continued as the Blue Zeo Ranger. Because if Trey still has his powers, then there's no real reason that the rest of the Zeo Rangers don't, although technically his powers aren't from the same source, but still. Aisha surely could have returned from Africa, with Tanya remaining the Yellow Zeo Ranger, and Adam could have passed the original powers back to Zack and continued as the Green Zeo Ranger, and Kat could have returned the powers to Kimberly and continued as the Pink Zeo Ranger. Although I'm not expecting the return of Trini because Tui Trang had passed away at this point, so recasting her could have seemed insensitive, so you can't really expect to see all these characters return, but still, this may be the setup for an epic ending, but I can't help but feel that a final battle for the control of the universe and absolutely everything within it is missing some pretty key allies. If Bulk and Skull are brave enough to fight back, then where's everyone else? I understand it's probably a budget thing, but you'd think for a final blowout in what was potentially going to be the last season, you try and get in as many people as you possibly could. If you needed time to facilitate all the returns and transfers, then there was plenty of filler that could have been removed. But also, one of the biggest things, where is Justin? He has his powers again, and he said he'd be there for them, with Stormblaster and Lightning Cruiser in tow. And where's Tommy? He's still the Red Zeo Ranger. You bring Jason David Frank back all the time anyway, so why is he missing here when it seems like an easy win to get him back? No. You can't have one final battle for the universe and have all these Rangers and allies just completely absent. But regardless, the real Rangers do reveal themselves and enter into battle. Only the true honour goes to Bulk and Skull, who lead the charge of the ordinary folk, and they finally get to fight shoulder to shoulder with the Power Rangers, in a non-comedic way. Meanwhile, Andros manages to create a distraction on the enemy ship, and while looking for Astronomer, ends up finding Zordon. Zordon convinces Andros that the only way to truly end this is to destroy his energy tube, killing him but freeing the universe of evil that threatens its destruction. But I just don't understand. Unless I've missed something or misunderstood this whole thing, Zordon isn't physically in the energy tube. He was, and supposedly still is, trapped in a time warp. Larigo was meant to have freed him, but then he wouldn't have had to have been in the tube. So the destruction of the tube should be just that. It's not the destruction of Zordon. It's like if you had me on Skype and then you smashed your laptop into pieces. You're not killing me, you're just destroying the means of which you had to communicate with me. You're still able to reach me. All you need to do is find a new means of doing it, like a new laptop. Technically speaking, it was stated that Larigo was giving Zordon his freedom when he sent him to Eltar and Turbo. It never strictly said that he was being released from the time warp. If he had been, it wouldn't have made sense for him to continue appearing in the energy tube throughout Power Rangers Turbo and now throughout Power Rangers in Space, when realistically he should have been able to take a physical form, like in the first movie. Which doesn't actually make sense in that context, but in this context it kind of does. He should have had a physical form, and his destruction should have been in that physical form, not in an energy tube. This is where I actually have to commend the 2017 Power Rangers movie. While it definitely has its problems, which I've made very clear in my video review, the notion of Zordon actually being dead, but his consciousness being locked into a computer on the Ranger's ship, kind of makes sense. At that point, Zordon is not alive, nor is he physically somewhere or somewhen, like he's meant to be in the show, but his consciousness, however, is physically somewhere, i.e. stored in the ship's memory banks. If the ship was destroyed or stolen, then he would be too, because the last remaining part of him, his consciousness, would be gone. So in that sense, if Zordon's consciousness was confined to an energy tube, or if you like, his spirit was confined to a tube, it would sort of make sense that he could be captured and then destroyed. But if the tube is just a vessel for communicating with him while he's in a time warp, then it doesn't. It is sort of alluded to that his good energy is in the tube, but then he actually would be more like a spirit that was physically in that space and time, and the whole concept of him being in a time warp wouldn't have made sense in the first place. If the tube is destroyed and he's still in the time warp, then Alpha 5 or 6 should, in theory, be able to reach him again in another tube, like getting another laptop to communicate with me on Skype. If you still know my username, then you can find me and communicate with me again. I haven't physically gone anywhere, it's just how you communicated with me that's gone. And it's not like the tube is one of a kind anyway, because the one on Earth gets destroyed at the end of Turbo, not to mention that there appears to be a different energy tube somewhere in the turbo chamber anyway, and he'd already had the original tube destroyed in the transition between the Mighty Morphin era and the Zeo era. So is Zordon alive or not? I do understand why they went down this route, of course. It's the whole power figure who's there but not physically there, but then frees himself into a physical body only to sacrifice himself so that his chosen humans can defeat the powers of evil. It's essentially portraying Zordon as Jesus. It's just that it fails in the execution because of some really easily remedied plot details. Not to mention the fact that it's never been stated that Zordon is so good that he's basically a god. But let's put plot holes aside for a minute. Andros is attacked by Astronomer, but ends up deflecting one of her own attacks back on herself. He's clearly distraught as he wanted to save his sister, but not as distraught as Ecliptor. Zordon convinces Andros that he must do the right thing and destroy the energy tube. He does so, and the good energy sweeps across the universe, but its effects are a bit inconsistent. Most of the villains and monsters are turned to dust, but Rita and Lord Zed are turned into humans, while Divatox is also turned human, although we never actually find out if she's Demetria's sister, as was hinted in the last video, although we're left to assume that she is, in which case she wouldn't actually be human, she'd be Inquarian, although she doesn't speak in questions. Not that that really matters, of course, because Demetria seemed to drop it pretty quickly too. Which, incidentally, where has she been through all of this? And Visceron too. No, not him. Seriously though, battle for the universe here. A better attendance record would be appreciated. After a slight delay, Astronomer turns back into Corone and the battle is over. The Rangers help the rebels return to KO-35, but Andros, Zane and Corone decide not to stay and instead head back to Earth too. And you know what? Even with the plot holes, this was still an epic ending to the series and a true blowout ending to the Zordon era of Power Rangers. Power Rangers Turbo was painful to watch, but I knew that I had to get through it so that I could do a video on this series, because this is the culmination of all my childhood fantasies of being a Power Rangers fan. This is where Zordon dies and all of the monsters and villains of the past 6.5 series all bite the dust, so to speak. It's what every Ranger that came before them was fighting towards, even though they weren't all in this episode, and it all comes to one almighty end. And if you make concessions for the fact that just maybe it was Zordon's physical being inside that tube, then it is the epic ending that every one of us could have hoped for. And so, thus ends Power Rangers as we know it. Yes, there's a continuity that carries on into future series, but in essence the entire narrative that's been weaved through multiple iterations of the show, right from episode 1 of the Mighty Morphin era, more or less comes to an end. From this point on, the basic principle is that it's a new team with less of a connection to what came before it, although not writing it off-screen completely, of course. What came before Power Rangers Lost Galaxy and the seasons that follow is still canon to the current universe, it's just that it doesn't have as much of a continuation as it used to have. We still have Rangers returning, and then in Operation Overdrive we get Thrax as a villain, the supposed son of Rita and Lord Zed, who must have grown up pretty quickly by the way, so it's certainly not over, but it still marks the end of a larger era. Lost Galaxy muddies the waters a little bit with the occasional mixing of the Space Rangers, especially as they use the same ship, and, spoiler alert, Corone becomes the Pink Ranger later in the series, but this is all a manufactured bridge between the two series more than anything else. To be fair, Power Rangers in Space is a welcome return to form after Turbo, but to be honest, it's probably twice as long as it needs to be. They even have the obligatory Amnesia episode, which just isn't necessary when you've got a good concept for a show. They nearly avoid the whole going back in time thing too, but then they effectively do it anyway by having a planet that's based on the Old West. Having said that though, there's arguably less filler in this series than in some previous ones. Most of the time when doing these videos, you can just skim through some episodes, whereas I found myself having to watch everything in Power Rangers in Space as it would be easy to miss something important, hence why this video is so long. I have to say though, when I was younger, I scoffed at the concept of Power Rangers in space. Putting in space felt like they were just jumping the shark, and I never watched it. But honestly, it's easily the best series so far, even if Professor Phononymous is pretty painful to watch. I love the original Mighty Morphin series, and Zeo was good too, but I think all things considered, this takes top spot so far. But anyway, it's time to take a look at the Japanese counterpart, Denji Sentai Megaranger. And this is interesting because it's based around high school students, so it's actually got the most in common with the setup of the US show. But how similar is it when we take a look at both series together?
Megaranger!
Okay, I'm already on board. Strap in, motherfuckers, because this is going to be good. So the series starts with a virtual reality arcade game featuring Sentai Rangers, before Japanese Shawn Michaels over here steps in and challenges the kids to a game. Let's not dwell too long on the fact that this is a grown man bullying little kids. We have a lot to get through. An older kid called Kenta steps in to take the challenge instead and ends up beating the bully into leaving. But then some creepy guys come over and ask Kenta to come with them, seemingly impressed with his skills as a gamer. They take him to Nasada, the same NASA knockoff from the US show. But something strange is happening as things are getting warped, and it has something to do with the approach of the Negia dimension, whatever that is. It turns out that the video game in the arcade was actually a training machine to recruit people to become real-life versions of the Rangers in the game. A little bit like the rumours from the American arcades in the 70s and 80s that stated that certain games were used to recruit kids into intelligence roles in government branches. A few other kids turn up claiming to be from a high school digital research club and ask for access to the building. They take advantage of some seismic activity to slip past the guards, where they find Kenta, who's happily sat eating the free food that was used to lure him there. Remember kids, don't follow grown strange men if they offer you candy. Hold out for Japanese barbecue instead. The kids are supposedly working on a school research project, and they think that there's more to the facility than is shared with the public. Before they can get thrown out, the strange seismic activity leads to a giant mechanical slowpoke bursting through the walls, and we're introduced to Dr. Hinara and Shibarina of the Negiregia. Don't come at me about pronunciations, I know I'm not that good at them. They deploy Uganda, which we would know as Ecliptor, to destroy the base. The kids get locked in a room with the project leader, but use the tech that they have on them, a mobile phone, a mini-disc player, or something similar, a camera, a laptop, etc., to hack their way out. Impressed, and with little time to explain, or indeed come up with any other option, it's agreed that these kids will be given digitizers to become the Mega Rangers. They're given the code to transform, and the Rangers disappear from the arcade game to enter reality. And the programming of the Rangers in the game is used to transform their moves in real life. It's almost like the kids are still playing the game, but it's even more like virtual reality because they are actually living avatars. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but it's actually a pretty cool concept. It's here that we get our first proper look at what the symbols in their helmets actually are, although we're not entirely sure why yet. Mega Red has a 90s style PC, Mega Pink has a mobile phone, Mega Blue has a TV, Mega Yellow has a video camera, and Mega Black, well, we don't actually see his, he just has a Popeye moment. But we do see later that his is a satellite. They enter into a battle with Uganda, but he's clearly not prepared for the Rangers, so that doesn't last very long. But even so, some bombs that were planted at Nasada begin to explode, so the Rangers are told to enter the shuttle and escape before it's too late, eventually arriving at the Megaship, which is essentially a space station that is their main line of defence from the Negiregia. The Doctor explains that while they may have rushed into making these kids the Mega Rangers, there's no going back now as the suits have become one with their genetics, so no one else can wear them. So even though there are some reservations, these kids are now the Mega Rangers permanently. He also explains that little is known about the Negiregia, just that they are hostile invaders. But we do learn that the Mega Ranger suits are indeed programmed with the abilities of the Rangers in the game, and that the symbols on their foreheads are representative of their specific abilities. For example, the satellite on Mega Black's helmet represents his ability to gain access to any man-made satellite and use it for whatever the situation demands. The other powers aren't explained necessarily, but they'll come up again in the series. Mega Red, however, has no ability as his PC essentially represents the fact that he can be programmed with just about any ability that is needed. They return to Earth after Emperor Jabius, whom we don't know anything about just yet, orders the Negiregia to attack and destroy the planet. It appears that the abilities in the Rangers' helmets also allow them to transport both themselves and the monster du jour into a digital realm and fight them there, rather than the real world, hence the sort of Tron-like appearance of some of the environments and enemies. The Rangers use their special weapons, the drill saber, the mega rod, ladies, the mega tomahawk, the mega sling, and the mega capture, but even so the monster manages to escape. So Dr. Kubota sends down the cyber sliders, or the galaxy gliders as we would know them, to chase him back to the horned mecha Slowpoke. They obviously can't take on the ship by themselves, so they head back to the megaship and begin the transformation into this season's version of Megazord, called Galaxy Mega. And that's the end of Slowpoke, but not the end of the Negiregia. Now at first we don't know much about the Negiregia, other than that Dr. Hinera, announces that they use demonic science. By episode 3, the Rangers are back at school, while the Nasada team have set up a new base, seeing as their Earth base was destroyed. And as the season goes on, there seems to be less of an emphasis on space as in the Power Rangers counterpart. The Rangers are more digital or electronics focused. The space base is more of, well, just that. It's a base which has over 100 employees on board. The Rangers tend to remain on Earth rather than roaming through the cosmos like in Power Rangers. They only return to take control of Galaxy Mega. Plus that focus on electronics explains the symbols on their helmets, whereas in Power Rangers they're only really briefly mentioned and it never really fully explained. And when it is shown, it's usually in footage that was lifted straight from the Japanese show. But with Mega Ranger it actually crops up quite a lot, although the effects are often the same. It's usually something to do with locating a Negiregia monster, although Shun's ability is awesome. He's able to project things into TV shows. So for example, rather than fighting the Negiregia, he can transport them into a TV show and the monster may end up as collateral damage in an on-screen battle. He can also project holograms, which comes in handy when Shibarina thinks she's identified Mega Yellow, only to see them both standing next to each other. It's also much darker than in Car Ranger. By episode 4, Shibarina has already started programming people via their computer screens to start murdering people and abusing drugs. The plan is to influence kids using things like hypnotic messages on the internet or on CDs, which I'm sure only served to make parents more paranoid at the time. Despite the Rangers managing to destroy every Negiregia sent to fight them, INET, apparently the company behind Nasada, aren't happy that the Galaxy Mega has been left in the hands of some high school students. They go over Dr. Kubota's head and have it installed with an AI program that renders the Rangers redundant. But Dr. Hinero recovers a piece of the Galaxy Mega sword and develops a monster using its own alloy, and is therefore too strong to be destroyed by the Mega Saber. The auto combat program isn't able to determine what to do, so Dr. Kubota maintains that Galaxy Mega was designed to grow alongside the Mega Rangers. He manages to disable the program and the Rangers take back control. A few punts later and the monster is thrown into a volcano, and INET reluctantly agrees that even though the Rangers were chosen purely by chance, they are actually the right way to fight the Negiregia. Episode 6 actually mirrors a storyline from the US show. In Power Rangers, Cassie has her diary stolen and then it is held ransom until she agrees to go on a date with a donut-munching shy guy, and then Astronomer unleashes an elephant monster to knock down a building containing plutonium fuel that could destroy the city. Whereas in Mega Ranger, Miku has a photo album stolen, which just happens to be full of professional pictures of her as Mega Pink. Two bullies make a deal with her that if she goes on a date with the larger, donut-munching shy guy, they'll return it to her later. Like in the US show, he's too shy to speak directly to her until they lose their chaperone. But then the Negiregia attack because there's an energy generator that could, what else, destroy the city. Cue Elephant Monster. We're then introduced to the digital tank, or the Mega Tank, which is almost like a police car crossed with construction equipment. The only real difference is that in the US show, when all is said and done and Cassie gets her diary back, Lenny asks her out for real and she says yes, but makes it a double date, taking Ashley for the other guy, George. In Mega Ranger, however, it turns out that it wasn't her album after all. The bully was just a creepy stalker who took covert shots of her, and Miku was scared because he said that he knew her secret. But the secret was just that she was falling asleep in school and he had been watching her. When Shintaro asks for a date, Miku says no, because she likes someone else, and then it's insinuated that she's a lesbian. Because diversity? Actually, she's not a lesbian at all, because we found out later that she's really in love with Shun, but he's in love with a robot that reminds him of his dead mum. We've seen some pretty weird things, but that's up there. At one point when it looks like they're all going to die from poisoning, Miku even buys a wedding dress because her dying wish is to marry Shun, I suppose, although she doesn't actually tell him that. But then again, that wouldn't explain this.
この感触素敵って感じ。
ほんとだ、千里の胸みたいに柔らかい。あのね、
あんのか触ったこと。
うん、弾みで。
だ
As a side note, with this being a Japanese show with girls in school uniforms, frankly I'm surprised it took until episode 7 for the first gratuitous low-angle shot. We actually get another mirrored episode later on in the series, when Chisato's wacky dressing grandma turns up and tries to matchmake her a husband. This is essentially the same concept as episode 13 of Power Rangers, when Ashley's wacky dressing grandma turns up to do the same thing. It's just a filler episode after all, but it's another example of how this series is closer to its US counterpart than Car Ranger, Ranger or Kaku Ranger ever were. Anyway, in Power Rangers we occasionally see Andros going to KO-35 for various reasons, but obviously in Mega Ranger this isn't a thing. Mega Red appearing in a far-off land is actually Uganda's attempt at separating the Rangers to fight one by transporting them through a portal to somewhere? It's explained as a subspace dimension, kind of a virtual reality thing, almost like with VR Troopers, but whatever the case, it's not hugely important to the overarching story. In fact, the majority of the first part of the series doesn't actually feature a huge amount of lore or things that are major storyline factors. That's not to say it's bad, it's actually a bit of a relief that it's easier to follow, especially after the craziness of Car Ranger, where most episodes were important to understanding what was going on. Although I still don't fully understand what went on with that car crash of a series. Pun very much intended. The first 20 or so episodes of Mega Ranger are an easy watch. Most of them are fairly self-contained, so not only do they not have much to do with the wider storylines, they're also fairly insignificant when comparing the Japanese show to the US show. It just feels like there's a lot of filler episodes. Again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, as they're still fun to watch, but in the context of these comparison videos, they don't really add too much. So when writing this, I did feel like I was glossing over a lot of episodes, but they just weren't that important into understanding major differences in the storylines compared to Power Rangers in Space. In episode 8, we get our first proper plot twist, in that Dr. Kubota used to work with someone called Dr. Samajima. Samajima was the one that discovered the Nejiregia's dimension and decided to travel there alone. And let's just say he looks more than a little bit like Dr. Hinara. In episode 9, Uganda gets a slight armour upgrade after being defeated earlier in the series, but he's not quite capable of controlling it. It's not until episode 13 that he resurfaces. But he doesn't last long, as we finally see a combination of their individual weapons with the multi-attack rifle, and after that takes much more of a backseat role than his US counterpart. Episode 18 actually mirrors an episode from Power Rangers Turbo. In Power Rangers, TJ befriends a litter-hating child called Utan, or Nature spelled backwards, when out for a jog. It's just a filler episode, but then in Mega Ranger, Koichiro befriends a litter-hating child whilst out for a jog, who also happens to be the spirit of the forest. Again, it doesn't really have anything to do with the wider story, but it's interesting that there's a direct comparison episode, but it's with a completely different season of Power Rangers. Now, there's also some question of whether this is also the same character as Kite from Power Rangers Wild Force, but I'm not too familiar with that series, so I can't really comment. Finally, in episode 19, things start to kick off properly. A Nejiregia ship attacks and starts to destroy the city, a little bit like the opening of O-Ranger. And then the Kuna Kuna get back to the old Sentai speciality of kidnapping children. But it wasn't Dr. Hinara or anyone under his command that ordered the attack. It was this guy, who we would recognise as Darkonda, but is actually Gireru. Go ahead, comment section, tell me how it's really pronounced. Jabius sent him to deal with the Mega Rangers, and sensing a change in the ranks at the Nejiregia, Inet develops a Battle Riser that increases Mega Red's powers. And then in episode 20 they introduce Delta Mega, which is also controlled by Kenta and his Battle Riser. He recovers the program to complete the Zord from an engineer on Earth, and then with Galaxy Mega in peril, Mega Red applies the program to the control center of Delta Mega, but obviously they need to add some extra peril by making him choose between the left and right slot, because one will complete the project, the other will cause it to self-destruct. It's an interesting design choice. But Delta Mega doesn't require Kenta to be on board. He can re-enter Galaxy Mega and control Delta Mega by voice using the Battle Riser. And then cue Kubota playing the trumpet because Maybe they had 30 seconds to fill, probably. But Guerrero realises that Delta Mega's ability to be controlled remotely might actually be its biggest weakness, and Shibarina is able to transmit radio waves that are able to counteract those produced by the Battle Riser. What follows is a weird episode where Kenta thinks that Delta Mega is a living being with feelings, which, to be fair, in some previous seasons, the Megazord figure is actually sort of alive, or is even like a godlike guardian. Fortunately, they're able to take back control of Delta Mega by using the Battle Riser to combine the two Megazords together to form Super Galaxy Mega. But with the added peril that if it goes wrong, then Galaxy Mega will also fall under the control of the Negeregia. Fortunately, that doesn't happen, and we have a new ultimate form of Megazord, which is also capable of a new move, the Super Galaxy Knuckle. In episode 24, the new Silverface...
Seriously, Ela?
I did Silverface.
Silverface? That's so offensive.
A strange biker turns up claiming to know who the Mega Rangers are. He's even able to tap into the Mega Rangers' digitizers. He's apparently Yusako Hayakawa. He goes by both his first and second name throughout the series. He's from the Special Development Division and is able to use his K-Tizer, ignore the cameraman, to transform into the 6th Ranger, Mega Silver. He was originally only a prototype, but needed to transform because Uganda had managed to use a monster to analyse all of the Ranger's powers, but it obviously had no record of Mega Silver's powers. As a side note, Mega Silver's helmet symbol appears to be a microchip, but that never really seems to have much significance. But in actual fact, he's not the 6th Ranger, he's technically the 1st, as the creator of the prototype suit, but not meant as an actual Ranger. He'd been reassigned, and taking over the suit does not go down well with Kubota, and he blocks the K-Tizer. However, the stronger Guerrero gets, it's clear that a 6th Ranger is needed. Only for some reason, like in the US show, he can only remain morphed, for lack of a better word, for 2.5 minutes. Like in the US show, Mega Silver rides a bike born out of his auto slider, although in this show he's a biker regardless of whether he's Mega Silver or just Hayakawa. But at this point I'm not really convinced by him as a Ranger, and that might be by design. He just comes across as reckless. If anything, Shogo has been more of a 6th Ranger. He's one of the lead engineers on the Mega Robots and continues to risk his life making sure that they're strong enough to fight. It's a bit like they're an extension of him and his will to fight against the enemy. And you need to remember that Galaxy Mega isn't just a Zord, it's also the entire INET base, which is full of people making sure it continues to function. There's no command centre, as it were, as Galaxy Mega is the command centre. And at this point in the story, Hayakawa is based at a separate lab on the moon, doing some research. He's actually much more separated than everyone else that's involved directly with the Mega Rangers. And I have to say, once we get into some filler episodes, I'm a little confused why Mega Ranger, like Car Ranger before it, does another negative female body image episode. In Car Ranger, Pink Racer thinks that she's fat, and then a monster that messes with numbers makes it look like she's even bigger. Then in Mega Ranger, Miku thinks she's fat because a broken scale makes her think that she's put on 10 kilos. But then she's tricked by a monster into eating a diet supplement that makes her and everyone else eat through the Earth's food supplies. They both end on relatively positive messages about body image, but it's kind of undercut by the fact that this episode is suddenly more wacky than anything in the series to date. It's trying to spread a positive message, but in what feels like a joke episode. In episode 30, Guerrero turns against Uganda and combines with him to form Giga Guerrero, and Mega Blue is almost killed by taking a direct hit to the head, cue obligatory amnesia episode, while Mega Black, Yellow and Pink are frozen in some sort of force field. Also cue the obligatory second blow to the head restoring his memory bit. The other Rangers are thawed and Guerrero is separated from Uganda, but the betrayal infuriates Dr. Hinara, not least because Uganda is almost killed. However, Dr. Hinara realises that Guerrero is the stronger of the two and is probably their best chance at conquering Earth, and so entrusts him with a capsule to increase his power, but obviously Guerrero plans to then turn against them all. Little does he know that the capsule will erase his mind and make him little more than a puppet, all the while turning him into a stronger, mad Guerrero version of himself. This forces the Rangers to leave for the moon to find Hayakawa, leaving Shogo to pilot Galaxy Mega while they're away. In Power Rangers, this is where they flee to one of Saturn's moons to find the Mega Vehicles. In that version, it's Alpha that's left to control the Megazord while the Rangers are away. In Mega Ranger, Shuogo is physically in the cockpit at the controls, but all the while Kubota and the rest of the team are inside. When the Rangers reach the base, they're given keycards to control the Mega Voyager machines, which are more or less how we would recognise them from Power Rangers, although the sequences are much more flushed out, with a battle on the moon for good measure. These Voyager machines combine to form Mega Voyager, just as Shuogo and Galaxy Mega are defeated by Mad Guerrero. Guerrero was taken down with a rocket, but it's clear that Galaxy Mega is badly damaged. Meanwhile, Jabius is furious with the backstabbing going on within the Negeregia, but Dr. Hinare isn't fazed and goes rogue, turning into a 70s prog-rock keyboardist, and introduces a new and improved Uganda. Uganda now possesses a new dark crisis weapon capable of various different attacks. Although I feel this isn't really utilised as well as it could have been, the story just kind of moves on. By episode 35, we get a similar storyline to that from Power Rangers, where Kenta and Miku overhear a doctor telling Yusako that he doesn't have much time, but obviously it's actually in reference to the fact that he can only remain as Mega Silver for 2.5 minutes. The Negeregia try to exploit this to kill him, but Yusako is able to fix the time limit on his suit before they're able to implement their plan. But that's not all he was working on. He's also been building a Voyager machine of his own, but before he can unveil it, the Vice Chief of INET states that he wants to shut down any work on Mega Silver as it was developed without authorization. And when Yusako is kidnapped by a Negeregia monster, he even states that the suit can always be assigned to someone new. Apparently the original prototype isn't like the final versions of the suit, which can only be worn by those who have had the suits moulded to their DNA, so I guess in theory anyone with the K-Tizer could take up the powers of Mega Silver. I can see why that would be something they want to remove, because in theory then any member of the Negeregia could use Mega Ranger's powers against them. But Kubota comes to the rescue, kicking ass in the tank, to deliver the K-Tizer back to Yusako, who then introduces the Mega Winger, both in its flying form and its Megazord form. In episode 38 we're introduced to the Negeregia's own version of the Mega Rangers, the Negirangers, and we finally learn what happened to Samajima. He is Dr. Hinare after all.
Oh my god!
It turns out that he's been plotting to destroy Jabius and take control of the Negeregia. His big plan is to use the Negirangers, that are not only meant to be the equivalent of the Mega Rangers, but are also able to draw power directly from Jabius, pretty much like their equivalents in Power Rangers in Space. If Jabius becomes too weak, nothing will stop Dr. Hinare assuming control, but the Negirangers are unable to work together, each hell-bent on destroying their own counterpart Mega Ranger. So the Mega Rangers confuse them by mixing up who they fight, but it doesn't really work, so they try confusing them even further. Shun suggests that they all change their colour to blue using spray paint. Miko and Chisato also seem to have managed their lady bits, shall we say. Either way, it does seem to work. That is until Negisilver turns up. But the remaining Negirangers are too jealous to allow Negisilver to have all the glory, so turn against each other. Only there was no Negisilver anyway, as it was Mega Silver all along. Anyway, the battle continues, with the Negirangers getting more powerful, and even turning into monsters and dragging Mega Voyager into a different dimension at one point. Eventually, Jabius is destroyed and his power is injected into the Negirangers, but the combined powers of the Megazords destroy them before they can attack. But he leaves behind his heart, whatever it's meant to be. This gives Dr. Hinare the confidence to fully take command and attack Earth. The heart is meant to turn humans into data, which Hinare can then command. I'm not really sure I understand, but this is where the data cards that we saw in Power Rangers come in. Anyway, their first plan doesn't work, so they try capturing people as they try to flee Japan, to take them to the newly formed Hinare City. And then the ghosts of the Negirangers turn up, and it all kind of feels like we're just killing time until the series finale. But Dr. Hinare continues his plan of digitizing humans so that he can reprogram them, and even the Rangers fall victim to it as well. But the ghosts of the Negirangers use the machinery to take on physical forms, so that they can bring the Mega Rangers back. Not because they've turned good, but because they finally want to destroy them themselves. Again, pretty similar to the concept in Power Rangers. During the whole process, the Negiregia learn the true identities of the Mega Rangers, so they send a monster to their school. The entire school then learn who they really are, but the Negiregia attacks the team's families, destroying Kenta's parents' grocery store. Not only that, but the principal of the school kicks them out because he fears that they're bringing danger to the other students. They end up questioning why they ever became Mega Rangers in the first place, leaving Mega Silver and a badass Dr. Kubota to take the fight to the bad guys. Seeing them losing badly, They realise there's no going back to a normal life. But Shibarina breaks into the club room at the school and steals data on the lunar base. She transforms Uganda into a much stronger version of himself and transports him via a hacked computer into the lunar base itself. Mega Silver and Uganda fight on the moon's surface, with Uganda growing giant and attempting to destroy the base. Cue badass Kubota in Galaxy Mega. Only Delta Mega is destroyed in the fight, and Galaxy Mega and Mega Winger aren't looking too good either. Mega Voyager can't be formed either because the hatch for the Voyager machines has been blocked. Meanwhile, Shibarina has attacked Earth in an attempt to draw out the Rangers. Kubota arrives in Galaxy Mega and the team are able to take over, only just as they're about to be defeated, the transformation that Uganda went through suddenly severely weakens him. Although I'm not sure if something got lost in translation here. With all the fighting on the moon and then on Earth, why did they choose to play Gustav Holst's Mars the Bringer of War? I get the Bringer of War thing, but then there's never any mention of Mars in this series. Is it because Uganda's now red? Or maybe it's just that it sounds good. I don't know, I'm probably reading too much into it. But just as Uganda is about to be destroyed, Shibarina sacrifices herself, all to no avail, as he's quickly put away for good. While this has all been going on, Dr. Hinara has been working on something, although we don't know what yet, and he's missed everything that's been happening. Shibarina survives just long enough to say her goodbyes. For the final battle, Galaxy Mega is out of action, Delta Mega is destroyed, Mega Winger is barely functional, but they do manage to launch Mega Voyager. It turns out that Hinara has been working on this thing, which is made from the Negeregia base, but before that, we finally learn what happened between Dr. Hinara, or Samajima, and Dr. Kubota. He was working on enhancing the human body to survive in space, but he ended up killing his own daughter in the experiment. In the end, INET supported Kubota's project to create the Mega Ranger suits, but unlike in Power Rangers, they're just suits, there's no superpowers, as it were. Samajima wanted to evolve the human species, and saw the Mega Ranger project as completely inferior to his work. And even though at the start of the season he referred to his science as demonic science, he actually doesn't believe that he's evil at all. It's because humanity turned on him after the death of his daughter, and called him a demon for trying to play God. He joined the Negeregia because Jabius promised to help complete his research, although he doesn't seem to be able to handle the toll this has all been taking on his body. In the end, the school students show that humanity won't turn their back on them, despite initially thinking Mega Rangers were the reason that the Negeregia appeared in the first place. However, Dr. Hinara all but destroys Mega Voyager and the Rangers lose their suits. But even with only one arm, they're able to continue fighting until Hinara's, ironically frail, human body fails him. Their final act is to fly the monster away from the city before it self-destructs. Only the Rangers don't manage to escape the explosion and we're left to believe that they died. They even leave memorial flowers on the students' desks and give a eulogy at the graduation service. But obviously they didn't actually die, they managed to transform before the explosion, and even get to graduate as well. And yes, it is a happy ending. However, I kind of feel it would have been more epic if they'd done a Batman and the Rangers had survived but disappeared, inspiring the next generation of Rangers. But while it was a true end of an era for Power Rangers, it wasn't quite that way for Super Sentai. So of course, there is the obligatory crossover with the next series, Seiju Sentai Gingaman. Now this actually takes place after the Gingaman series, and does establish that this episode is maybe canon, because it acknowledges that the Rangers have been fighting space pirates, I don't know, I haven't seen the series, and now they've returned to their normal lives in the Ginga Forest, seemingly to live in peace, making baskets for the rest of their days. And then... God no, there's a talking tree, isn't there? Okay, go on then. While they're waiting for the Star Beasts, whatever they are, a monster appears and begins to destroy the city. This is controlled by a space pirate called Gregory. Anyway, Gregory proceeds to kick Gingaman butt until Mega Red turns up to save them, and then there's some next level Zord that happens. I mean seriously, look at this. Only that doesn't really work and the space pirates flee in their flying mosque, only for... hang on, wait, what? Okay, so this isn't Shibarina, this is Hizumina, and she gets Gregory to resurrect Dr. Hinara and the Negeregia. Gregory is supposedly someone that predates Gingaman's regular enemies and is kind of a lone wolf. Kenta takes the Gingaman Rangers to meet Chisato, but this is where the two shows clash a bit, as she's now working for INET, but the Gingaman series brings in the concept of magic, and the two are a little bit at odds with each other. Chisato does tests on the Ginga Brace to understand the whole magic side of things, but it's stolen by Hizumina, who apparently was technically not brought to life by Dr. Hinara, but by BB Devil. How did that little prick have the powers to bring things to life? He made monsters big by biting them and injecting an enlargement virus, not any specific resurrection powers. Hizumina was picked up by Gregory after she'd escaped and found herself floating through space. And then... I have no idea what happens. All sorts of Gingaman characters turn up, none of which I recognise. But then this was technically aired after the Gingaman series, so I suppose it would have made sense at the time. But anyway, the monsters want the Ginga Bracers, so they can revive both the Negeregia and the Balban monsters, whatever they are. And they've also managed to create some sort of barrier that prevents the Star Beasts from returning to Earth. But Hizumina betrays Gregory as she remains loyal to Dr. Hinara. But that doesn't really work, and she's struck down, with the space pirates bringing back Captain Zahab, whoever that is. The rest of Megaranger return and get to work on these pirate putties before taking the fight to Gregory and Zahab, before they can revive a demon called Gelmadix. Although they have already managed to resurrect a huge amount of Gingaman monsters, and Gelmadix returns anyway. The Rangers call for Galaxy Mega, and the Black Knight turns into a mech form with his Go Taurus sword to form Bull Taurus, and cue the giant monster versus mech battle that ultimately ends with the Star Beasts returning, turning into their own mech forms and combining to form Gingayo and take out the bad guys for good. And that's it. That's everything. I have to say that despite being completely different shows, both Power Rangers in Space and Denji Sentai Megaranger are good shows in their own right. Gingaman, I'm not so enthused about that one from what I've seen. I also didn't realise it at first, but for the first part of the series, both sets of Rangers don't actually have their own individual Zords like we'd seen in previous seasons. They get their own vehicles eventually, but even so, they don't really use them that much. And to be honest, I think I prefer it that way. Most of the time they just rushed through the transformation sequence into Megazord anyway, but the Astro Megazord in particular is just made of the Megaship and the Shuttle. And I kinda like that. Yeah, the Dinozords are awesome, albeit underutilised, but Zeo went a bit overboard with the number of Zords on screen. There's also less emphasis on a new monster each episode. The emphasis is more on the overarching battles with the bigger villains like Astronomer and the internal struggles inside Dark Spectre's inner circle. This is how it should have been from the beginning, because it means that the US show is less reliant on Japanese footage. I realise it probably wasn't in the budget to begin with, but surely it could have been adopted earlier than Season 6, or 7 if you include Alien Rangers. It's also good that AJ is relegated to Blue Ranger, as there was no way that he had the acting chops to lead the team through another series. He can be pretty wooden at times, and to be fair, Astronomer's acting is pretty sketchy too, but seeing as she's playing Corone too, you're kinda stuck with her until the next season. I do appreciate that in Megaranger, not only are they high school students, but they actually have to go to school and have parents that make appearances too. In Power Rangers in Space, they don't really bother. They do go back to school every now and then, but barely. And there's no mention of trying to explain to their families why they keep disappearing for long periods of time while they go searching through space. In Megaranger, they show that they are actually still high school students and that they struggle to maintain a double life. It also leads to one of the best jokes in the series, when the guys are all pining over a student teacher, and the fact that they'll have graduated by the time she returns, only for Kenta to say, "I'll see you next year when I get held back." They even get into trouble at one point because they haven't been keeping the school website up to date and have racked up huge internet bills. I kind of feel that Megaranger is everything that Power Rangers should have been from the start. It still has some cheesiness in it, obviously, and the styling is very Japanese, but it's the best series from the Zordon era comparisons, at least in my opinion. I did actually really enjoy O-Ranger, but it did suffer from odd pacing and tonal changes throughout. But Megaranger is, well, for lack of a better term, mega. And I like the style choices. The suits are cool, the Zords are cool. We've seen some pretty dodgy putty-like characters in the last few seasons, but the twisted-faced Kuna Kuna are actually not bad. In episode 14, they even come together to form a giant monster in their own right. There are some small missteps, obviously. If you keep an eye on the computer screens throughout the series, they don't exactly try to make it look like the programs are particularly advanced. For example, this looks like Microsoft Paint and a non-connected Internet Explorer. Even at the time, this would have been fairly clear. And I have to say, I find it strange that with this series, they throw in some token Western characters who, for the most part, speak Japanese, but will also occasionally speak English. But even then, it's often dubbed by a Japanese actor speaking English.
Something's wrong. What shall we do?
I can't really put my finger on why these were used, because it's not even like it was a tool for making the Japanese footage more adaptable to the Western show. They're just kind of thrown in there.
Mr. Hakase, long time no see.
I really don't know what these are for, and they just kind of stick out. Maybe it was an experiment to see if they could create more footage to utilise in both versions. Who knows?
Yes, everyone! We did it! With teamwork, we did it with everyone!
But all in all, both series are good in their own rights. I can't really recommend that you start with Power Rangers in Space though, because there's so many things that you would need to know beforehand to really get the full impact of some of the storylines and the eventual ending. Whereas Mega Ranger actually sums up everything that was great about the original Power Rangers, so watching that in isolation is perfectly fine. Now there was actually a Mega Ranger video game as well, but I can't actually tell you too much about it, because unfortunately, firstly it's very text-heavy Japanese, and that's because it was an edutainment game on the Sega Pico of all things, so it comes with a follow-along book, also in Japanese, and can only really be played on an actual Pico, which I definitely don't have. Maybe Kinsey can help me out on that one. Naturally, it never got ported to anything on this side of the globe, and there wasn't even a new Power Rangers game until Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue, which is a real shame because you have a set of Rangers that are effectively video game avatars brought to life, but then you don't have much in the way of a good video game to accompany it. But at the end of it all, two very good series, both worth your time, and that is officially the end of the Zordon era. What now? Ah, I know. Let's go Bomb Bomb Dancing!